All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. I'm extremely honored, humbled, and grateful that Mr. Winter has joined us yet again today for another fantastic lecture presentation. And of course, I believe he's brought some of his associates whom he's referenced quite often, whom I also have tremendous respect for. So without further ado, Mr. Winter, the floor is yours. And thank you so very much for returning today.
Thank you. Yes, happy to be here. As everyone knows, I'm Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, flameandmind.com. Today's subject has to do with how plasma becomes intelligence, literally plasma intelligence, the physics of ensoulment. And we have some special guests with us today. Jason Matozzo has joined us. He's an expert on some of the socio-political parts of this. Maybe Jason's waving there. Jason is my key partner from theimploder.com and Vortex Technology, a developer of Ultra Imploder, and also has been studying the deep science, esoteric science of all these things with me for many years. And we plan a fun dialogue toward the end of this about how we would apply the physics of what is a soul to the current political situation. And also with us, Patrick Botti has joined us informally. Patrick is our lead programmer, a bioscientist, biologist for flameandmind.com, iThrive.com, realheartcoherence.com, sacrocranial expert. His website is craniosacral-app.com. And Patrick is an expert on the measurement of deep sleep analysis, which is the physics of lucid dreaming, and will correlate that to the physics of what is a soul in this conversation. So the structure for this conversation, the suggested structure is I prepared some fun slides around this theme of what makes plasma intelligent. And if we knew, we'd not only know what a ghost is, but what the spirit is, what a soul is, the science of soul. And so that slideshow, maybe we'll have fun with them for maybe 20 minutes or so. And then I would like to introduce Jason at that point, and we want to apply this to sociopolitics. Like, can we do this collapse process using the science of soul to what is to solving the political problem here? Okay, so we're talking about the physics, the science of how plasma becomes intelligent. And if we understand that, we have the clue to the real physics of what is a soul and science of spirituality. And for that purpose, I prepared a slideshow. The slideshow is in Keynote. It's called Plasma Intelligence. Here it is. There we go. And the intro slide is here. So are you seeing the slide? If you knew how plasma, yes, okay. If you knew how plasma becomes mindful, self-aware, then you would know what ghosts do after death, how tornadoes are steered, and there's the article on that, goldenmean.info/dowsing, how plasma heals, therify.net, the origin of angels. You would know where you can and cannot go in a lucid dream. You could know why ball lightning usually responds to telepathy. You'd know how your brain's plasma tornado sees without eyes and makes bliss. You would know how intent arises in black hole and wormholes, hint the 9. You'd know the plasma origins of concepts of God and heaven if you knew how plasma becomes mindful. You would know what orbs and elementals and nature spirits are made of. You would know how alchemy as isotope transition, LENR, charge collapse, becomes alchemy of the soul, which is literally spin-dense communion, when the vortex plasma tornado comes to center. The physics of soul is the theme here. You would know why the implosion fractal conjugate point is the center of gravity of all mindfulness. If you track your center of gravity from your feet to the center of the earth, the center of gravity is the center of a mind for an electrical reason. So if we knew seriously how a plasma tori, plasma field became mindful, then we would have the answer to lots of important stuff, the physics of spirituality, and therefore, and that's the end of this conversation, possibly the end of religion wars. And we're going to suggest that even the current war in Ukraine is indirectly a religion war, because if we understood the physics of soul, because Putin is telling his people that the West is soulless. And if we had a scientific answer to that question, we might be able to do the psychological collapse process with Putin.
So if you go back to the first slide.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Jason. Go ahead.
You know, and we're talking about how plasma becomes mindful. I want to just kind of make it real simple for people. Like, what is plasma? What is your plasma, right? So we're talking about your plasma is your aura, right? And you could say that your plasma, technically, and if you want to talk about the ultimate, the highest level plasma would be highly charged plasma, which you could even say is quantum, right? I don't like to use the word quantum. Dan doesn't like to use that word either, or long range interferometry charged plasma bubble, meaning that your aura, right? Long range interferometry means that you could have a particle here, right, on Earth, and you could have a particle, you know, millions of years away and millions of miles away in another galaxy, and they could talk to each other with no loss of communication. That's quantum, right? You could be in this dimension and other dimensions.
Non-locality.
Yeah, non-locality, right?
Yes.
So what we're saying is your aura really is a human quantum computer in terms of that we can understand today, that has an interface to what we want to call God or higher intelligence, your higher self, etc., whatever term you want to use.
Yes.
So just start off there.
It's really a longitudinal interferometry. And you can hear the passion in Jason's voice. I like that. And that longitudinal interferometry potential to act at a distance specifically begins with understanding how that implosion sets up that connectivity.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, hey, this is what it is from the beginning. And if you have that in your mind, okay, my aura is this interface to God. And we'll go into how maybe that interface is broken or how we could start that interface back up again. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Dan.
No, great, Jason. I love the enthusiasm. Excellent. And Jason, remember, is the co-inventor of theimploder.com, implosive vortex in the plasma. That's what we're talking about, which is the implosive vortex in your aura. So so the background philosophy here is your biology teacher knew most all living biology is formed around spiral golden ratio fractality. That's old news, you know, the Fibonacci golden ratio is the signature of biology. But because your biology teacher did not teach you why that geometry is the center of all biology, the why is because fractal implosive charge is the cause of life and negentropy. So because your biology teacher didn't teach you why golden ratio implosion, then you did not learn how life force plasma becomes self-aware, intelligent, literally by turning inside out. That's the point. So biologic examples of plasma charge fields becoming informed, self-aware, directly from the fractal implosive process of recursive turning inside out. And that's the pictorial series immediately after this slide, recursive turning inside out. For example, the physics of compassion and heart rate variability. The electric implosion in your heart identifies compassion. I've been teaching that for years. For example, this is the source of the harmonic inclusiveness, which identifies viability / immune health, HRV, in all living things. So harmonic inclusiveness doesn't just predict whether you have an immune system in your body, but harmonic inclusiveness predicts the viability of every living thing. And that harmonic inclusiveness is generated because the donut turns inside out recursively, thus implodes and includes all those harmonics. So examples of that in biomechanics are Kundalini biophysics, you know, your brain is imploding and your spine liquids are imploding. We're going to talk about the origin of alphabet, alpha brachyth, that the turning inside out of the torus is identified as the first word of Genesis, and how that identifies turning inside out, perfected 7 steps. We're going to talk about tornado steering for shaman. We're going to talk how DNA turns inside out to braid into the torus. Hint, physics of soul, toroidal DNA. We're going to talk about egg. It delivers a dimpling process, initiating the 7 stages of invagination, literally perfect turning inside out mess. And we're going to talk about recursive turning inside out in the EKG, the physics of compassion, pictures we've used for years. So some of the pictures that are very well known for this, this is from Dirk Meyer, but notice how he says the sequence of steps from a plane to a cylinder to a torus imploding, torus in a torus. So there's a sequence of symmetry operations that initiates recursive turning inside out ness in a plasma donut. And when that goes to implosion, harmonic inclusiveness, then you have the connectivity with the longitudinal interferometry at center, the physics of soul, and the centripetal force, which we call self-aware. Example, when you see the little plasma vortex form inside your head, and the kid says, oh, I can see without my eyes now. And so these are more pictures from Dirk, just you get the idea that recursive turning inside outness is the centerpiece of the idea of becoming self-aware. And once we understand it in toroids, we can understand it in plasma physics, and then we can understand it as the physics of what we call a soul. So this is plasma becoming self-aware in a sequence of turning inside outness. Notice the 7 steps on the bottom, and we're going to talk about why there are 7 steps to recursive turning inside outness. That's the theme, and these are all from Dirk Myers. So, but you see that these pictures of, for example, tornado theories at the Planck scale, in the quantum foam, and then at the level of the weather, topologically, it's the same process. And then this is for the advanced people. If you see the turning inside outness of the torus as the physics of the origin of the fine structure constant, and this is all at goldenmean.info/predictions. And just one quick sentence from the bottom, like a boy playing with a seashell, I arranged the inductance equation of toroidal coils to the form of the solution of the velocity equation, and got the fine structure constant. So the fine structure constant is actually a map of the completion of turning inside out ness. And that's evident actually in if you derive the golden ratio from non-destructive self-reentry here in blue. So is this how turning inside out ness is perfected? 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside. The 7 spins, we're going to talk about the 7 sequence of turns to turn inside out surface of torus, the first word of Genesis. And topologically, this is inherently seems related to the fact that 7/5 pi over E equals phi, golden ratio, very close to many digits of accuracy. And that 7/5 is the 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside of the classic Anu slipknot of plasma intelligence symmetry as seen in the heart of the sun, the heart of the human, and the heart of the hydrogen by the psi perception of quarks clairvoyant, who then predicted what was later discovered in modern chemistry from psi perception of quarks by Phillips. So this is all about perfection, beauty as perfection of implosion, and the recursive braiding process that leads to implosion. You've all seen. And, so when we do it in water, which Jason and I have been doing at theimploder.com, we're adding spin density. And at the center of spin density, you get that connectivity, that 7-fold flow form, which turns out to be the 7-color donut, which turns out to be the physics of perfected turning inside outness, implosion, etc. And you've seen these slides many times, I'm sure. So this is actually Louis Kaufman having shown that non-destructive self-reentry is actually the equation for golden ratio by definition. And non-destructive self-reentry precisely identifies when plasma turns inside out and adds its own inertia, literally defining self-awareness. And there's, of course, the fractality and the electrification of the heart. These are very old slides. I think there's some animations here. But this is a branching algorithm. And that branching algorithm is actually introducing us not just to the physics of compassion and the origin of the electrification of the heart, but it's actually defining the branching algorithm, perfect fractality, of the longitudinal interferometry, the physics of soul. And that's where that harmonic inclusiveness and heart rate variability, and this is realheartcoherence.com, leading us to the classic slide. Here is when time breaks down, origin of cardiac arrhythmia by Arthur T. Winfrey, map of the geometry of the voltage electrification of the heart. So when your 3-year-old asks you, where does my heartbeat come from? You show them this picture. Then you say, I would turn myself inside out for you, darling. And you would have identified the physics of compassion, which is that non-destructive compression, turning inside outness, recursion perfected. And so that's come on, baby, light my fire. And that is the origin of that centering force, that perfect nesting. And that actually then becomes the physics of grace, because if you move with that quality of grace, the physics of yoga, and then you feel that spark inside your body, the quality of grace is actually literally implosive capacitance. But so then this is to what Jason suggested we include here, which is here is the sperm right there hitting the egg. And what it delivers is capacitance. And that charge initiates this right here, invagination, a dimpling process, ident I5. And that dent is actually, if the capacitance is sufficient delivered by the egg, will then cause that egg to turn inside out in 7 stages of invagination called fertilization, actually. So turning inside out is the first move you ever made. It's quite clear. And if you animate that, and we gave shades of, but here's that donut. But notice that donut, when it's turning inside out, will then decay into 7 smaller donuts at different tilt angles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that actually is the physics of why Education of Oversoul 7 says there are 7 branches of your soul incarnate in this lifetime. It's very fun. Anyway, so this is the growth spiral of the fetus and a perfect branching algorithm. You've all seen these before. The physics of golden ratio, perfected distribution means there is minimum superposition, maximum exposure, but it also means maximum capacitive implosion. And it's beautifully illustrated by the X-rays of seashells. That implosive centering force in that smoke ring toroid, in this case, is the beginning of ensoulment in plasma, non-destructive turning inside out mess. So self-similarity perfected becomes self-awareness perfected. So the ability to turn inside out non-destructively requires self-similarity perfected. And that becomes a capacitive radiance, which identifies the geometry of growth. So that weak electric field, that capacitance resulting from that coherence radiance of charge implosion, the physics of pine cones, as it were. So that the origin of that negentropy, remember from this is from Fields of Form, Vortex of Life, Lawrence Edwards' famous biodynamic anthroposophic. And you can use a pine cone for rainmaking for this reason. And in the book, you can see the angle of those seeds on the pine cone opens and closes over the seasons to adjust the amount of voltage that pine cone is extracting from gravity. So it is a 0-point energy device for that reason. And that is an example of implosive capacitance causing negentropy and therefore life force. And I think we had some animations of all this in 3D. Anyway, and so this became Ptah, the image of Enki, essentially Ra, as a cosmic egg creator, because he was able to form the geometry of the perfect egg. It was exactly exquisite and excruciating. And so the reason why the different ends of that egg have a positive versus negative electric charge is instructive. The positive charge, which is plasma projected, is at the sharp end, and you can taste that. And that the reason that egg has more positive charge at the sharp edge and the dull edge tells you which end of the vortex Schauberger put the electrodes at to extract voltage from gravity from his water vortex.
It also has to note that the egg has to be a fresh egg.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Exactly. In fact, you measure that voltage and you determine freshness. and that's a goldenmean.info /measuring life force, which is actually measuring that ability to implode. And most of you have seen these slides before, so we're going to go through them quickly. You know, so your biology teacher told you this was beautiful, and your biology teacher told you this was fractal, but your biology teacher did not tell you why. Because it needs to implode capacitively to be negentropic and to be alive. And then later, that's how the plasma becomes self-aware. That's why that ball lightning torus responded to telepathy. So this is the geometry of that implosion at center. You've all seen these pictures. This is from, we then applied this to measuring life force. And here's some examples. The fresh egg, warm, just laid, if the low frequency power spectra determined that it was organizing its weak electric field, and you can tell which egg is fresh by that weak capacitive field, measured the same way we measure a brainwave, with the same tools, actually. And the reason it's alive is because it has organized its weak electric field capacitively implosively. And that ability to implode and organize your weak electric field is life. And that's because the plasma inside is imploding and becoming self-aware. So then this becomes a theory of immune health, that the harmonic inclusiveness of the cell membrane versus the virus, if the cell membrane's foldedness is harmonic inclusive or fractal, then the keys are in the lock. If the cell membrane is a sphere defining cancer, then the cell membrane has no lock because it has no harmonic inclusiveness. So the lock and the key is literally the frequency signature of the virus compared to the frequency signature of the cell membrane. And that's a key and a lock. And harmonic inclusiveness means the lock has more tumblers. That's why harmonic inclusiveness and heart rate variability and membrane foldedness, structural stability and morphogenesis by Renee Thome, the membrane foldedness defines cellular intelligence. There's Lipton says the brain is in the membrane. And so this becomes a theory of immune health. And so applying this to the plasma physics of Kundalini, this is a torus donut in the homunculus of the upper brain. And when that turns inside out, the low frequency phonon triggers that map of an amperage wave traveling around the homunculus, and you feel it in your tailbone, then you feel it. But then you realize, well, it's all in your head because, so what's happening is the magnetic donut is turning inside out, and that implosion becomes the lightning effect of Kundalini. This is more of the key and the lock idea of membrane harmonic inclusiveness determines immune health. And again, the ability of the virus to access the membrane is identical with the geometry of Machu Mandir in India, or Aurobindo, which is actually the cathedral is a virus, literally, and it's screwing itself into the membrane of Earth. And that embeddability is why it's named X-catheter, which is very cathartic because it's the catheter of the blood. And the blood is the magnetic inertia in the membrane, accessible only if you have the key in the lock. So the geometry of the virus, the geometry of the membrane identifies immune health. And that circuit becomes the somatid cycle of morphogenesis of microbe as waveguide from Galileo the microscope, which actually then became therified.
I think we could see the parable that Dan is saying here, that if you have, the cathedral there, if you have let's say a building that's not built correctly on a ley line, that's not built of capacitive charged materials, or that allows capacitive charge to bleed through, correct? Which stainless steel actually might do it, but we can talk about that later. But it's destructive to the land, right? Over time.
That's right. The joke is this: the farmer that wants to sue the power company to remove the microwave antenna, all he has to do is use a 10-cent measure to soil compaction, and can prove in court that metal tower has murdered the microbes in the soil compaction, and force the company to remove the metal antenna because he can prove it killed the soil. But the irony—
what do you call that? What do you call that in electrical engineering terms? So you have a charge field, and now you have something that's sucking off a bad ground that's sucking it off.
Well, the needle effect. So the needle is bleeding charge if it's not in the right spot. So the metal tower causes soil compaction, literally soil death. It's cheaply measurable. So the farmer can prove to the power company that they just murdered his soil.
So it looks like a malfunctioning circuit. It's trying to implode, but something is stopping it. So now the parable here is that viruses within the blood and within your body are doing the same thing electrically within your body.
Well, and that doesn't mean the physics of acupuncture is evil, but it means you need to know where to put the needles. But
I was saying on a very microscopic level, these viruses that are made, as you can see, that they attach, that's what they're doing. They're breaking you up electrically.
That's right.
Why when you feel sick, you feel like your aura is gone.
And And you are literally screwed because they screwed themselves into your membrane.
Yes, that is correct, and we could see that with prions.
Well, yes,
like that.
but you didn't let me finish my little joke. It's okay, I don't mind. But
no, you go ahead with that.
My little joke was that you could use the same procedure of suing the power company to remove the tower that's murdering the microbes in your soil, because a Catholic church has a sharp steeple and an Eastern church has an onion steeple. And the Eastern church onion steeple will not murder the microbes in the soil, but the sharp steeple. So now we'll come back to that when we get to our discussion of whether Russia has more soul than the West. We're going to apply.
I was going to say that those churches in Russia are pretty nice.
They got onions in the steeple. Do they have more soul? Okay. So anyway, so this was the morphogenesis, the somatid cycle, which is a beautiful way to see that actually the bacterial viral cycle is actually a morphogenesis of living plasma turning inside out. That's the point. So if you take the word brachythe, at first in principle, the origin of thingness, which is the first word of Genesis, the 6-7 turns that you make is actually, if you look in the outside in of the torus, the letter you see there is B, bait. And then you walk 1/7 of the way and again look at center, and the shadow from that point of view is the letter rish. And so you do 7 turns of mind to turn inside out on the surface of a torus. The turns of mind necessary to turn inside out on the surface of the torus, brachythe, first word of Genesis, was mistranslated in the beginning. Actually, Faber d'Olivet in Hebraic Tongue Restored did a much better job. At first, in principle, the origin of thingness. So the origin of creation was the ability to turn a torus inside out. And that is a sequence of turns of mind, the shadows of which the sacred Hebrew, et cetera, et cetera. And so
and isn't that a 2-dimensional representation of the 3D waveform in the Hebrew alphabet?
Exactly, literally. And you've all seen those animations, goldenmean.info/DNA ring. So here we are in Flatland. And we'd like to leap into the next dimension. Shadows on the wall of the cave. So, but the point was that this was a plasma symmetry map to turning inside out, which is how plasma becomes self-aware. And in terms of 3D animation, you see the turning inside out. Let's see if these things are going to play. I send you my Valentine. And there is the perfect heart within hearts. So this implosion effect will help us to think about the physics of recursion in DNA braiding, recursive braiding. Later we'll see the biophysics map of toroidal DNA, literally the plasma field of DNA in a donut imploded by recursion. So this is some of the mathematics I used to do.
Now that is if you go up 2 slides there, actually one slide down, right there, just the thought forms from cymatic into, physical matter, you could say. That's
that when you enact a Hebrew letter and focus on it, you're choosing the angle of the toroid donut in the optical cortex, and you're blowing the smoke ring at that tilt angle, which is the physics of how you make the atomic table, for example, or how you make a golem if you happen to be.
Yeah, I mean, you said you've been teaching that for 20 years, right?
Yeah.
Now, does everyone on this chat know what that actually means? Because, all right. So
I don't personally know.
When you're looking at the Hebrew alphabet, right? Yeah, think of it as it's a 2-dimensional representation of a 3D path, right?
Hebrew or Sanskrit. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Hebrew or Sanskrit. So what Dan is saying here is if you visualize the 3-dimensional waveform or a 3D version of the Hebrew alphabet in your mind, right? In your mind's eye, which would be the visual cortex in the back of your mind, right? And you have to see it in perfect 3D. I mean, and close your eyes and you could see it perfectly. And focus. Now, if you could visualize it and say it at the exact same time, theoretically, and this is supposedly what the ancients have done, they could literally speak the word of God and create matter.
Well, because all you're doing is causing plasma donuts to nest, embed at accurate angles, which is
But the aura of the being who did that, Enki perhaps, had to have been so implosive to be able to do that, to create matter from his own aura by speaking.
That's right.
And whether that's still a metaphor of a machine that they created, or whether that was the actual physical being that was a higher intelligence doing it, we don't know.
Please
Dan
forgive me,
probably
guys.
knows, but
Please forgive me, guys, for jumping in. I just wanted to ask, does this have any correlation to any Enochian texts by chance?
This
Well,
is the Enochian, yeah.
Yeah. So
Got you. Thank you.
the Enochian, ophanim Enochian was a superset of Hebrew. Hebrew was the index of the symmetry of that spiral and torus in a tetracube. You take a superset of that in the hypercube, dodec, and then.
And Dan, I'm not sure if you're aware of this. There's a new book or phenomenon called the Bach saga.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not sure if you've heard of that.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, so in the Bach saga, supposedly it was a story that was handed down through one family, right? And they never
right.
shared it until,
Right.
but it's interesting to
just
note that
had
their
somebody on who
alphabet is
covered that.
the ophanim Enochian alphabet.
Yeah, that's right. That and the Bach saga supposedly is related to Enki indirectly, because Enki was the Nordic Odin. I believe.
You guys are speaking
Yeah.
my language. We just had someone on 2 weeks ago that's big into the Bach saga. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to talk to, I have my friend, we'll talk about it later. Go ahead.
That's okay. This is just the graphic then, that if you pronounce those letters accurately, yod, he, vav, he, the power spectra frequency signature of the plicative audio phoneme, the frequency signature is a picture of the optical letter as drawn for very important reasons. You could speak to that computer and it would hear its own machine code. You see, it was, anyway. So that's called Spectrograms of the Hebrew Alphabet by Carlos Suarez, which I replicated in my first book, Alphabet Power.
I mean, think about it. Modems, how modems used to work.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
it would screen bauds into or sound wave frequencies, and you would decode those sine wave frequencies to digital.
And
But
so
in this
actually,
case,
the geometry of the pressure wave you say from your mouth when you say yod is actually a cone. And the reason for that, or if you say va, it's a cone going the opposite direction. Yod he va he is opposite light cones, because that is literally the phoneme plasma pressure wave symmetry. The phoneme becomes the electric wave. And so if you get those two opposing cones to collapse perfectly, or phase conjugate, at the perfect collapse point between the two opposing vortex cones, you get phone calls to ancestors and what Jason was talking about, this longitudinal interferometry. And this is why scintillation allowed ancestor phone calls also in John Dee's studies. And this leads to the concept of the phase conjugate mirror and time reversal, which, Jason, we may speak about later in this conversation. So this is all introducing this idea that when there's implosion between opposing cones, that compression implodes accurately to Planck threshold, and at the Planck threshold, the squirt gun emerges in the longitudinal coherent interferometry, and that's DNA radio, basically. That's action at a distance. And that's the 7 spins, 5 spins. And on the right, you see how psi perception of quarks use that Anu to predict ahead of time what subatomic physics was going to discover 3 Anu per unit quark, literally. So the clairvoyants figured that out before subatomic physics did. That's what led me to the sun. And so then this was the physics of compassion. So we want to talk about that harmonic inclusiveness, wave on a wave in a wave in a wave, embedding or braiding, identifying not just perfect embedding in heart rate variability, and therefore how you measure immune health as heart health, but that fractality predicts viability in everything. So every living thing that's doing non-destructive compression, fractality, harmonic inclusiveness, is creating viability, immune health, and that's an indication that the substructure enabling that is living plasma spinning to a 0 point. And so there's that beautiful animation of the braid within the braid braiding. And we're going to see where that recursion is identified in the DNA literally turning inside out, imploding at the moment of bliss and becoming toroidal, which is, again, the same process, that the DNA is actually plasma intelligence. And is the DNA making the plasma intelligent, or is it the other way around? Yeah. And so this is called pelastration, or non-destructive self-reentry in DNA geometry. And here's the paper by Dirk Lawrence And so this becomes actually recursive braiding in DNA. And on the bottom center is a photomicrograph of DNA in a torus, actually. And there are such photo. And there's 7 sequence of symmetry operations in that turning inside out, which we just saw is called the 7 stages of invagination, famously made famous by in the Steiner literature. 7-fold. And so this was then about, if you can inhabit that center of spin, then you are the dervish that's just proved to your master that you can do the dervish turn without getting dizzy, proving that you have pure intention because you can inhabit the lightning bolt of the shareable wave at the center of that plasma vortex tornado, sometimes called the movie Powder. And so this is called Slipping Knot Cosmic Donut Maker. And we wanted to, this was, I'm going through quickly because there's too many pictures, but you see that if the next subject is how tornadoes become steerable by shaman. That's what you want to visualize. The exercise of learning how a shaman steers a tornado is a beautiful instruction in this plasma physics of how plasma becomes self-aware. That if you were, and obviously the center of that, this was Katrina, you see the center is pent for that implosive reason. So this ability to get plasma self-aware on the land, you know, America is complaining because no one's steering their tornadoes and they're having drought. Well, hello, no one's steering their plasma. So this is called biofeedback, America. Lack of large-scale human bliss process, lack of collective lucid dreaming, lack of rose petal fractality in farming, excess metal in human building, magnetic lines cut unwisely by construction, need for labyrinths, open lack of respect for elemental beings, ignorance of how to steer solar wind. All these things means we're not steering our tornadoes, so the elementals are angry. So for that, so for now, you're going to have drought and tornadoes because no one's steering your plasma, because no one taught you. Hello. Because the plasma is aware and it gets insulted if you don't talk to it. The elementals regard humans as drunk because we don't talk to them. So they're upset about it, and I don't blame them. So if you watched a shaman steering a tornado, this is what you would see: the bioplasmic streamers from the belly of the shaman embedding in the center, implosive center of the tornado, wave on wave in wave. And this is at the moment that shaman says, I'm eating the chucha, which is to say eating the anger. I'm feeling the pain of that tornado better than it feels its own pain. And therefore the plasma of the tornado follows the shaman around like a pet puppy dog because it feels, someone feels its pain, which is to say, and remember, pain for a tornado is a metal trailer park because it breaks up its plasma. Healing for a tornado is a sacred stone circle because it's centripetal. So the sacred stone church will never get messed with by the tornado, but the metal trailer park will get blown to hell every time because the metal trailer park is pain for that tornado. Once we know the definition of pain, which is plasma bleeding fractality. This is the eating hoocha, and this is from the movie Twister, and you see that tornado is learning to turn inside out, and this is how a tornado turns inside out. Oh, it's a map of the Anu. And so this is the 7 spins, 5 spins, and we're back to the same conversation. So in the end, religion wars, even Putin versus Ukraine, and I think Jason may have something to say about this, are in part about who has a soul. What if the biophysics of ensoulment were measurable? Then spiritual science could make agreement possible because science could end religion wars. I've been saying that for 30 years, haven't I? And so here's some examples of how we might measure ensoulment. Brainwave implosiveness, flameinmind.com, heart rate variability implosiveness, ithrive.com, nighttime dream coherence analysis. And I'm going to show you that site because it's so fun about how you analyze whether you got to deep sleep dreaming phase in your sleep. When you measure that, you're measuring ensoulment because, and there's a little story I got to tell. Then you could also measure this in aura analysis, GBV. You could measure it in geobiology, that if your plasma, if your aura is, hey, Joe, you're beside yourself. If your aura is beside yourself, like sometimes people after the vaccine, you can see that their aura has become dissociated because the plasma tornado is no longer centered in your aura. And that's actually measurable. It's teachable in Stephan Cardino's geobiology school, for example. So that, or a dissociation from center, can be a measure of ensoulment. And then the advanced measurements would be DNA braid coherence, called boson 7 or microchloradians in the blood. And so this gets into the physics of lucid dreaming. That and here's the story I want to tell. I'm going to tell one last story, Jason, and then to you, okay? So, but the last story I got to tell is, if you don't mind, I thought it was so much fun. Is you remember there was an episode, and I have a visual for this. This is the night analysis software from iThrive.com. And so we can measure whether you got to deep sleep. And deep sleep is, let's see, right here. Yeah, this is the dark blue part of this wave is the moment during the night when you got deep sleep. And now in order to make this a Star Trek episode, the ship's counselor, Deanna, realizes one day that everyone on board the ship has just become grouchy and short attention span. And so the whole ship now has a psychology problem. And she figures out the reason the whole ship has a psychology problem is because no one's getting deep REM sleep. And then she figures out it has to do with, they went through part of the galaxy where the magnetic geometry was such that you could not lucid dream. Hint, the longitudinal interferometry there wasn't fractal. The Aboriginals know how to find that place. Well, they missed the spot where lucid dreaming was possible because the longitudinal field wasn't there. So everyone on board was not getting lucid dreaming sleep. And therefore everyone was getting grouchy and short attention. Marina, Deanna, the ship's counselor in Star Trek, figured that out. Well, here it is. The reason why access to deep sleep and access to lucid dreaming is a measurement of ensoulment, because that's the array you need to inhabit, or else. And that array is actually the magnetic geometry around your starship. I mean, your bed. So if your bed is at a magnetic line cross, what the Aboriginal would call dreaming line song track, you have a better chance at. And that gives you attention span because it gives you embeddability. And we know, I just showed you the slide where you know the frequency signature which triggers lucid dreaming. We know why, Therify.net, because it triggers implosive embeddability and therefore longitudinal plasma projection. Therefore, you can inhabit the array. Therefore, you can lucid dream. So the reason, so science is well aware that if you don't get down there to that deep sleep, you're in trouble. And all we're saying is now we know why, because it's actually VLF to LF ratio in heart rate variability, which identifies when you've gotten to that deep embeddable sleep. And here's a cool, this is a little tidbit you'll enjoy. So Patrick, who programmed this, iThrive, ITHRVE.com, and Patrick might even say something here, I don't think. But here, look, Patrick has put an accelerometer in the bed, your iPhone. So here you're measuring your deep sleep HRV ratio on the bottom, and on top, this is your movement during the night. Notice that during the deep sleep, you didn't move, whereas during the shallow sleep, you did move. So you can actually measure whether you got deep sleep with an accelerometer on the surface of your bed. Ain't that cool? So, you know, Deanna didn't have all these tools in Star Trek to actually teach deep sleep and access to lucid dreaming, but access to that deep inner world. And that relates directly to near-death experience, which is the initiation called Jesus or the Templars. It was all about surviving. And that has to do with heart rate evolution. And anyway, so I think I'm sort of finished with my fun little slideshow here. Jason, why don't you, please, what are your thoughts?
Was that really, that was a Star Trek episode?
Yeah, there was everybody on board was upset and doing terrible. And the other, well, we're not getting our deep sleep. It has to do with the area of the galaxy we're in. Well, the longitudinal array enables embeddability, so it matters where you sleep.
Is that what they said in the episode?
Well, they didn't quite get all of the physics sorted out, I don't think. Yes. I had to finish the job.
No, but that's very okay. That's going to bring me right to what we talked about the other day. They found out, there's a book called The Adam and Eve Story by Chan Thomas, right? And if you guys were watching the what is it called? The Joe Rogan podcast. There was a gentleman on from Bright Insight, this huge YouTube channel. He was on there. He was talking about the Adam and Eve story. But anyway, in that book, they find out that when you send rats or mice or animals up in space, that they turn cannibalistic, right?
Right.
And they go crazy.
You said that. Yes.
Yeah. And the reason why they found out is lack of magnetic field in space.
Right. The magnetic grid.
Because there's no magnetic field. So they equate with loss of magnetic field or low magnetic field with loss of empathy. Right.
Which could be,
that's what's happening.
Which could be loss of access to Schumann harmonics indirectly.
That could be true, but I believe they did say it was the magnetic field of the Earth, which is that the Schumann?
Yeah, the low frequency weak magnetic field is the Schumann harmonics. So in effect, Schumann harmonics are teaching you how to implode. And when you exit the Schumann harmonics, suddenly you become a cannibal because you can't implode, you can't turn inside out. Yeah,
exactly, but they're just saying a weakening magnet. So what do we see today? I mean, the magnetic field of Earth over the past 1,000 years has been getting weaker, correct? Mm-hmm. And in the book, the Chan Thomas book, they're saying that happens every 10,000, 12,000 to 15,000 years, and that's our cycle.
Yes.
Right.
Interesting. That was also the main point of Tutankhamun prophecies by Maurice Cotterell, that the Maya, actually Quetzalcoatl Viracocha, essentially left because the solar flare magnetic periodicities at one point prevented ovulation. And that's actually
could this potentially explain the amongst many ancient human cultures the Zodiac Wheel, because you had to use different times to know when to plant, when to crop, when to
yes, right. Well, there's other aspects, but that's part of it. That magnetic alignment is fertility. The other part of that is you had to avoid the moon if you wanted a seed to germinate, and that is a very simple physics.
And I believe they also know the cycle of this, what they call a magnetic, Chan Thomas called it a magnetic null zone.
Yeah.
That we pass into.
Right.
Yes, and the example of the moon is instructive there. The reason a seed won't grow if the moon became between the sun and the earth is the moon is a hollow metal sphere opposite to dielectric, and therefore inhibits the propagation of the longitudinal coherence from the sun to the seed. For example,
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah,
right.
The moon is literally death to a seed, and that's proven by if you put the copper plate on the roof and a wire to the basement, the seed will grow fine with zero light as long as it's getting a longitudinal wave from the sun.
Yep.
Could I ask, guys, if it's all right, gentlemen, a question about, since we're on this topic pertaining to sleep? It's interesting that this was even brought up because I had this prepped from a couple days ago. But if we look at the basic, just surface level, different brainwave states, and obviously delta being the lowest, I believe, that relative to what the public is told. I want to be very clear. What I noticed when looking at these images pertaining to the delta wave, the 0.5 hertz, is that is the closest one could get to, and forgive me if I'm making leaps here, but it's the closest one could get to what you guys are speaking of, and what, for example, Sir Roger Penrose's Emperor's New Mind book of collapsing the wave speaks to. Is it, dare I say, without sounding, conspiratorial, the suppression of this knowledge had to be capped there, because anything below that 0.5 hertz would seem to signify some type of, again, ultra low frequency VLF, ELF wave that could, again, impact us in ways that we're not familiar with?
Well, it's very useful to say that consciousness is the collapse of the wave function. That is useful to say. We have new information here as we've identified the exact frequency signature of perfected collapse, golden ratio times Planck, that implosion.
Right.
That centripetal implosion, that perfect collapse is what, there's no question. And it is also true in brain waves. For example, in my case, lots of theta, low frequency, lower than alpha, a huge amount of theta, and they call it theta healing, and we know why. They call it access to the unconscious. The lower the frequency in your brain wave, the bigger the plasma being you're talking to. It's very simple. So you're right. Yeah. When you get down to the 0.5 hertz, you got a pretty big plasma. And most people will be in deep sleep when they get there, unless they've learned to lucid dream. So that is a very useful way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and that long wave, that long range interferometry wave is a long wave, which is a lower wave.
I don't mean to jump all over the place, guys. Does this speak to the concept of, or that debate within science and academia? Is gravity a wave or a particle? Well, it's both, but neither. Speaking to the duality and collapsing of the wave.
That's a confused question. It's actually a mistaken question. Gravity is gravity is a name for the acceleration experienced. And since now we know that mass is simply charge rotating, so charge acceleration defines gravity. So gravity is the charge acceleration that fractality caused. That's very simple. So we now know a precise answer to that question, and calling it particle is really not helpful. It's a
thank you.
Quantized.
I apologize. Thank you. So you said, sir, I'm just writing this down. Gravity is a wave for accelerated experience?
No, gravity is a name for the acceleration of charge fractality causes. So when charge accelerates towards center due to fractality, that charge acceleration is named gravity. Remember, charge rotating defines mass and time. And when that charge accelerates towards center due to fractality, we name that resultant acceleration towards center. We name that the gravity. But
gravity is a name for the acceleration of charge that fractality causes.
Exactly. That is exactly.
Thank you.
Yes. And by the way,
go ahead.
Well, just to recognize that same acceleration of charge towards center identifies consciousness itself. And that's an introduction to this idea that planets and stars experience gravity relations erotically. There's a reason for that.
Thank you so much. Sorry,
yeah,
Jason, and then I think
the reason why the Earth has gravity is because it is fractal, and you can see by the imploding donut from the poles, from both of the poles.
Yeah,
and it's because it's in where it is in relation to the sun, and we have the moon is your gravity stabilization unit for this cycle that we're in.
Does this speak
causing
to
the implosion?
Sure. Does this speak? Right. Does this speak to the proposal of what's been coined 0-point energy temperature states, which is that the universe, if you will, regardless of how micro or macro you go due to the non-locality of our existence, if you will, is one giant cosmological feedback system like a toroid field?
Well, the theory of continuous creation, the continuous Big Bang by my friend Dwayne Elgin was an example of that. The fact that Planck is a constant for 1 billion light years in all directions is about the only evidence they have for this idea of the Big Bang. But the fact that the waves agreed on Planck is indicated by perfected distribution, which could be perfected recursion. So the Big Bang doesn't have to be a singularity. That was Dwayne Elgin's point in that book. But the fact that everyone agreed on Planck is the fact that distribution was enabled because at the Planck threshold, the transverse interferometry became longitudinal interferometry, the definition of a gravity wave. And
that speaks to self-distribution just repeating in a fractal state.
It's all about perfected distribution. After the definition of heaven replaces their own. And then back to Jason's point that astrophysics is now clear. Golden ratio is stamped over every interesting gravity relation in the solar system. It's all about golden ratio. But nobody told you the reason. The reason is because it stabilizes implosion, thus gravity, and thus atmosphere stability. But so Jason,
go ahead.
No,
I was going to say the best thing you could do is put railroad tracks everywhere and 5G everywhere, and that's going to be very good for our gravity. And we wonder why we're losing empathy on this Earth very, very rapidly.
Yeah.
So it's really just kind of learning that physics. I think we could kind of stamp it here in this kind of talk, where it's kind of the first time we're talking about merging kind of like spiritual science, where you would get from ancient shamans, from spiritual leaders, and this new/old science, right? You could say from Dan, and you're really kind of merging those together. And if you have that, you have a soul.
That's right.
And that's what really all the shamans and spiritual leaders are trying to tell us all these years.
That's right. Physics can now tell us what a soul is. So therefore, now Jason, maybe, so supposing we decided to just do the psychological collapse process with Vladimir Putin here, who is telling their people that the reason they had to kick NATO was because we are soulless. So now that we know what a soul is, can we do the collapse process on this religion war, ?
Sure. There's some questions asked by another gentleman here. I forgot your name there. It's Real W.
Real,
Real,
yes, he's a hero.
yeah, Real. So he was saying, how does weather manipulation HARP come into play with steering tornadoes, and are hurricanes also deliberately created and things? So the only thing I'm going to say about that is, okay, yes, we could get conspiratorial and say, yes, there's HARP manipulation, which of course there is. That, of course, is not, it's not enough to really damage the Earth's fractality, you could say, but it does, when it's on during the times that it is on, it does affect your lucid dreaming and steering tornadoes. And that is the reason why it's able to steer and create a tornado, because it is creating that field. So HARP, you could say, is a tool, it is a real world example of how we steer tornadoes, because they have the technology to steer tornadoes and create them. Really, that's what it comes down to.
And that relates to the old story of Nikola Tesla making super high transient quasi-longitudinal high voltage waves around the Colorado Tower, and recognizing that he caused some earthquakes, actually, because remember, Tesla didn't get the frequency signature right for longitudinal interferometry, and he didn't get the nodes correct for pickup of the charge. So that's why he didn't get power distribution without wires. But he also didn't understand that that same longitudinal wave is the physics of gravity waves, and therefore earthquake trigger. So all of these things, once we understand how plasma becomes self-aware and embeds in that longitudinal interferometry, which is DNA radio, which also is the gravity grid, the places where Bruce Cathy measured the decrease in nuclear critical mass, for example, is actually the key. And once we understand more of that physics. But so Jason, we had that fun conversation earlier about, Putin is giving this propaganda to his people.
Well, yeah, so supposedly in Russia, they play on their news channels and television shows there that everyone in America kind of tells their children when they're like 5 years old or 4 years old, they don't say you're a boy or a girl. They let the children decide that, right? And he's saying he doesn't want the people to listen to rap music. He doesn't want. He's paying people, Christian families, to have more than 2 children, right, and things like that. So
he's opposed to the gay rights and so
yeah, he's not gay rights. He's opposed to the transgenderism, like giving children these hormones and things like that at a young age. And
if I may jump in, gentlemen, I know that when Oliver Stone interviewed him with the Putin interviews on Showtime, which have conveniently been removed since the war started from Showtime, at least where I live, Mr. Putin had said, pertaining to gays, transgenders, absolutely in full agreement, Jason, with what you said. Also, he believes that Mr. Oliver Stone pushed back a bit, saying, are you trying to ban it outright? And Mr. Putin said, at least on the surface, his surface reason was, I want to wait till they turn 18 or 19 and then they can choose for themselves. But up until then, he believes in the traditional family orientation, as you referred to it as.
Right. And the purpose of this conversation is not to make a judgment on very controversial political questions.
Right.
For example,
if you're looking at an electrical engineering side.
Right. Exactly. That. So, for example, also the argument about abortion. We don't even need to take a stand on these issues here. All we're trying to say is we have the tools to answer Putin's criticism of the West once we know the physics of what a soul is. Then we can say, oh, we've measured these children. These children are becoming lucid dreamers. We know how to teach our children to have a bliss process. We know how to create a soul in our children. Once the physics of intelligent plasma is teachable, then the religion war can end, because there can be a consensus process based on science. So that's where this was,
Yeah, and you need intact genetics, and you need to have intact biology. You can't be after a transition of being on hormone blockers your entire life and ruining your entire genetics. And then 25 say, oh, now I want to, search my DNA and repair myself. I mean, that's where it is. And if you have millions and millions of people who don't implode their DNA on this planet, you have massive loss of gravity on the planet. And you literally have the sun creating a micronova. And that is what you really call the Great Reset.
which means our children are losing their soul en masse because our medical science does not know what a soul is. We're not even saying that genetic engineering is evil. We're just saying you shouldn't be hacking up your DNA until you know what a soul is.
Or at least they claim publicly to not know, right? And then they try to hide it from us. Yeah.
And yet we now know, it was called boson 7 or microcaridians in the blood, but you're actually measuring the plasma coherence around the blood, which is now we know even the frequency signature, why it predicts whether or not you can lucid dream. We know that if you can lucid dream, you'll take memory through death. So if ever there was definition of ensoulment, it's right there. It's plasma intelligence.
Exactly. Go ahead, like Anakin Skywalker, right? That's the analogy. He has microchloridians in his blood, so he had the most, he was able to control the force or had most access to the force. He had the most blood that had implosive recursive DNA, and he was able to have long range interferometry / quantum connection directly to the source, and he's able to control it and create matter or control matter out of nothing, the same way that Enki did, saying Yod Hey, Bod Hey, and
the same way that
waveforms.
The same way the United
the
JED, right? The same way the Navy announced just last week. Oh, we suddenly discovered, or not discovered, they announced publicly exactly what you guys have been describing, which is what I believe is not only attributed to your guys' work, but also Tesla's work. How many years ago?
What did they announce?
I'm paraphrasing here, please don't quote me directly, but the Navy had talked about they can now send electronic signals over long distances wirelessly. If that's not what we're discussing here, I don't know what is.
But in conventional physics, they say entanglement produces action at a distance through what they call Einstein-Rosen bridge. Obviously, it's because they don't know that entanglement perfected is what phase conjugation implosion is, and the Einstein-Rosen bridge is a name for the path of longitudinal interferometry, because they don't know that the longitudinal EMF is the gravity wave, right, by Bearden's equations, which is why they think dark matter exists, because they don't know why there's too much gravity, because fractality is what causes gravity. So not knowing why an object falls to the ground is a direct reason why your science teacher couldn't teach your kid how to have a soul.
Right.
And that's a key point. So Dan says, black hole, too much gravity, right? When you have something so implosive, you create a black hole, correct?
And black holes are obvious. See, dark matter was the mistake. Dark matter was just a name for the fact that there's too much gravity. It means nothing else in physics other than as the name for there's more gravity than we can figure out where it came from. Once you realize the universe's masses are arranged in a fractal, you know where the extra gravity is, and the dark matter idea is a mistake. The black hole is a name for the large-scale perfected implosion, and black holes become very self-aware. That's why the climax of Deep Space Nine was, oh, I went into the wormhole and I discovered the wormhole was making all the big decisions. It's because the wormhole itself has intent. And the reason is, for what we're just discussing, because the plasma became recursive on a very large scale. So stable gravity identifies very stable awareness. And that's why the universe is all arranged around golden ratio and fractality, because that stabilized gravity and awareness.
Wow.
Like what Dan said, he said, if you can measure fractality on the Earth, you can find where the black holes are. So if you can measure, the star mother on the Earth, on the node points of the star mother, if you could find that place on the Earth, you will find that black hole node point. And coincidentally, you will also find megaliths and other sacred sites on every single one of those node points.
Well, that was proven in physics in the Cozy Rev Mirror literature, where you couldn't get the military quality telepathy of the place Cozy Rev Mirror, which is microwave thallium by the simple phase conjugate microwave, unless it was on a sufficient nanotesla magnetic flux density measured Earth grid magnetic line cross, for exactly that reason, because you didn't get longitudinal embedding, you didn't get telepathy. So the Cozy Rev put all the proofs in place in that.
And what explains explains the flux density, Dan? And then we'll get to Peter, then Riel. Well, anyone else?
Because you couldn't get the nanotesla of magnetic flux density of Earth grid magnetic cross unless there was a sustainable standing wave implosion point called sacred site there. And it wouldn't stay there unless it was part of fractality, which is why the Earth grid is dodecacosa defining those sacred sites, which actually is where all the cathedrals and labyrinths and stargates can work, and lucid dreaming.
because of
Deanna,
perfected charge collapse.
That's right. And
Right.
Deanna would not have had a problem if she'd have known where to place her ship according to that physics.
Thank you. Peter, please.
Or a
Yeah,
real.
I wanted to.
Go ahead.
Hey,
Peter.
thanks for inviting me. I reached out to you yesterday. I asked about the Tribonacci constant.
Oh, yes.
But I guess, I mean, if you could touch upon how that applies, because it's not as talked about as Fibonacci, but it's just an extra term. So instead of adding 2 terms, it's 3 terms that continue to this constant that's like a cousin to phi. I don't know how that's applied to your research. I found out how it's instantiated in the square. I can talk about it sometime, but I wanted to just ask you about that first, the Tribonacci, and then also the jitterbug.
Yes.
I've played with it on GeoGebra, where you can actually compress it even more when you're using like a 3D calculator. You can see that, I mean, there's a lot more to it. There's just so much there. I don't know where to begin. I'm trying to. Yeah. Maybe you could talk about the jitterbug and then talk about Tribonacci and just take it from there.
Well,
so much there.
This was, I learned this personally from Bucky, but it was called the jitterbug. Yeah. But actually,
right.
It is a model, a useful, accurate model from cube octa, ecosa, dodeca, octa, tetra.
Yes.
It is an accurate, useful model of non-destructive charge collapse. And even Nassim got that right. He called it a model of superconductivity for that reason. And Tom Sawyer even used this to model superconductivity 30 years ago at our conference in Buffalo. So now, go ahead.
So one thing I just kind of talk about the movement of the jitterbug. Like I said, I've been able to, you can map it on GeoGebra and other things. It's cool to have it physically too. But one thing I think there's probably some interesting patterns, or maybe what I've noticed is, okay, when you have it compressing from the 8 triangles, it compresses and turns. But when you actually keep it north-south, and if you keep that face like this, so it's fixed, and then compress it, so what I'm saying is, normally when they're all moving equally, it moves it in an ellipse, which is interesting. Very simple geometry. But when you keep the north and south face and then you compress it, it forms these from the top down. It's like a flower of life pattern.
That's right.
And the patterns, I don't.
That's right. They're fixed.
Know what.
Yes.
What they, I mean, I just want to know, like, what are those mathematical, I'm trying to trace the locus points, but I'm just an armchair mathematician, but I just wanted to share that with you. Maybe I can share the images sometime, but Dan, they're beautiful. They're beautiful vortices. And like I said, top down flower of life, it's incredible. And you can do the same thing with the dodecahedron, icosahedron, that also does that. I mean, there's some.
Supposedly the path curve from the cube octa to ecosa and then dodeca, because it's cube octa, ecosa, and dodeca. She's there, and supposedly the path curve, even the path curve of those is golden spiral based, and that's why it enables non-destructive charge collapse. So the main, the dodeca ecosa is essentially the DF subshell of the electron radii, which is the platinum group metals and the noble gases all have completed DF subshell, which are dodeca ecosa. So that's why alchemy is related to gold, because the DF subshell ecosa dodeca is doing non-destructive implosions.
There's lots of that.
I think you're.
Now, Dan, does that
what about
ecosa dodeca fluctuate between each other, and it's the wave between that's really the magic?
Well, again, and this in part might help Peter's useful question, which is, remember, in terms of also the Tribonacci, that in each case, the difference between numerology and physics is when you predict what a wave of charge is going to do. Until you predicted what a wave of charge is going to do, you're just doing numerology. At the point at which you predict what a wave of electric charge is going to do, then you've gone to physics. And in that case, the non-destructive charge collapse from the dodeca ecosa is reflected in the physical chemistry of the DF subshell perfected collapse enabled by gold and noble gases, because why they're noble is because of those completed shells of dodeca ecosa. So essentially the physics of alchemy is the process of taking that implosion to the fusion point at center, which is why the alchemic philosopher's stone could immortalize, because it enabled implosive charge collapse. So again, But Peter, to try to specifically talk about your question, I don't know if the Tribonacci sequence has an electrical meaning yet, but I could say that my suggestion would be you look for an.
I'd be curious to see. I'd be curious about that.
Yeah,
because there's one place.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Where I found from like basic research, the ratio is I think I'm cutting out.
Yeah, we're losing you.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
But the ratio of Tribonacci's in the snub cube, which is pretty cool. And then I just wanted to share this with you guys, because this is why I reached out to you, Spawn. I hadn't seen you in years, but I've been watching your content. And then thanks for getting back to me. So what I was playing with rotation of and I asked myself, at what angle does the rotation here, see this is 90 degrees, what angle does this rotation equal the angle of the shadow here? And I played with that. It's very basic, but I can send you the link, but it equals it at around like 57 degrees, where the ratio of this to the so Tribonacci is encoded in the square in a very basic way, like fundamental and elegant. So I just think that that's another clue that it's such an irrational number.
That probably has to do with an electrical shadow, which is quite useful. The angle that enables a cube to embed.
So I wanted to maybe
the angle that enables
more to it. I'm sorry.
The angle that enables a cube to embed in a dodecan 3D, that 32-degree tilt, is critical electrically. So I think you could probably find an electrical.
Not even dealing with a cube, just a square of squares and
but
triangle.
Again, to predict electrical field implosion that way would be useful. So let's return to that question. I think it's beautiful, your work. And if you want to share a link to where people can learn more about your work, that's fine as well.
Awesome. Can we jump to Jason, then we'll go Riel, and then we have a question from Jacob in the chat here.
Go ahead, Jason.
So I wanted to get back in that other question from Riel. It says, are frequencies we are being subjected to preventing lucid dreaming on a mass scale?
The new literature, I think it was 30 and 45 to 48 hertz were trigger frequencies for lucid dreaming. We now know the golden ratio infrasound of Therapy, which is the BLISS infrasound of flame and sound, flame and mind, are lucid dreaming triggers in Therapy, which is replicably lucid. So lucid dreaming clearly is triggered by implosive harmonics, implosive to Planck. That's proven. So if you don't implode, you don't lucid dream. It's very simple. And most of the frequencies we're being exposed to prevent implosion. Absolutely. All the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and this crap that we're surrounded with. So absolutely, that would inhibit lucid dreaming for sure.
Yeah, and that's why forest bathing is huge, and everyone is doing things like that. So,
or Luke Skywalker moved to deep nature.
Yeah, that's the only way he learned to
raise the Jed.
Use the force. Raise the Jed.
May the force be with you, Luke.
Yeah.
Riel, did you want to jump in about did you want me to put up the Russian church pictures while you're asking?
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Because I wanted us to maybe look at the visuals of the onion Russian church versus the pointy Western Catholic church. I just sent these images to David. Is this what you're referring to when we talk about the ensoulment, lack of soul?
It's related.
It's cultural,
There would be points at which a sharp needle on the land could be constructive if the charge projected by that needle was embedding in some kind of longitudinal array. But if not, then the land is simply bleeding charge and it's going to kill the microorganisms. So the onion church is more likely to contribute to fractality than the sharp steeple church, absolutely. And by the way, the gold there is quite useful for implosive capacitance. So in a superficial way, we could say probably most Eastern churches have a bit more soul.
Or the builders had a bit more understanding of the soul or fractal geometry.
Essentially, the question is a large and coherent plasma intelligence building or bleeding?
Not to jump all over the place, but that I find it quite peculiar that, again, the alleged state of Tartaria is where Russia currently is, allegedly.
That I was thinking about the Tartaria thing too. You could say I'm trying to think of what my thought process was on that to introduce it. But yeah, you could say that, you know, I don't like to use Tartaria because if you understand history, you understand that a lot of that stuff is not.
I got you. It's like saying Gnosticism. It's overly vague.
Yeah, basically, if you believe in Tartaria, you're removing all of the Templars and things. You know what I mean? Like the builders are non-existent. The Masons haven't done anything. They didn't build the churches. The Templars never built the churches. It was this strange Tartarian group, and you're totally taking that history right out of the equation.
I was right. Now, to be fair, just to clarify, I was speaking more to the sudden alleged disappearance of Tartaria, assuming I'm not mudding up my facts here.
We could say that there was a people in the 1800s had a very, very high culture at a time, and they knew how to build these things. And because of, there was World War I, a lot of those people and the builders are gone, and they weren't able to rebuild, right?
Right.
And that's really, I mean, we're as we're losing magnetism, we're also losing empathy, and that also is losing our culture on top of it. So you're
pulling away from things. Right, pulling away from source negantropically.
Yeah. So we're forgetting how to build these things. We're moving away. So you could say around when was the Carrington event? That was 1860.
Something like that.
During the Carrington event, there was a solar flare, which you could say that was almost in direct correspondence when we started putting up telegraph wires everywhere.
Yeah, which
wow,
broke the fractality, and so the whole question of the Grail bloodline and the Ashoka Ashkenaz bloodline and all the stories with the Jesus bloodline actually is about, is there enough implosive fractality in the blood to make a lucid dreaming child? That's really what it's about. And so we don't need to argue about the religion of that or even the history of that. We can measure whether our blood is making lucid dreaming possible.
Right. Jacob has a question, if that's all right.
And so does Riel.
Oh, sure. Okay, we'll go just, if it's all right, Riel, just because Jacob hasn't, thank you. Jacob asks, can you explain how seeds can yield more growth with the whole vortex concept?
Well, right at the top of therify.net. In fact, one of the biggest agricultural universities in Germany just ordered a therify to make seeds grow because it's so clear that actually stone circles, when they proved that in the center of most of the great dolmen was not a place for burial or a place to store food. No, the primary use for most of the ancient sacred stone circles was to charge seeds to make them germinate electrically. I will raise a shaman to the Lord. So we know why implosive plasma, hint therify.net, for example, makes seeds germinate. I mean, we're talking 200 to 500% growth effect sometimes on hemp, because the seed's first move you ever make is, does it really suck? If it can suck in the first nutrient, then it germinates. So if you zap the seed with implosive plasma, obviously, that's raising a shaman to the Lord. What are we looking at? Go ahead.
This is, I believe, Mr. Peter Chema is sharing his screen with us here.
I'm trying to share my screen. I was telling you about the, hold on. So that's one of them. Jesus, see it on Steerable.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Very nice.
I sent you guys links. So top down, it looks like what do you call it? I mean, look at that. That's a perfect icosahedral shape. And when you compress it, just look at a few of them. Look from the top down. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. So it's Icosa, it's a tetraflammine Icosa. That's very nice. That's the
look at this one. Jesus, so cool. So to be clear, these lines here are basically like the trajectory of those points.
Nice.
Normally, when they all compress equally, they rotate, and like I said, it's a basic ellipse.
Yes,
it's a basic ellipse, which is like they say that's like the trajectory of orbit. But then when you fix the top and the bottom, it does this amazing. I just might as well scroll through them while you peruse it. But
yeah, it's gorgeous.
Happy to share with you guys because I love this stuff.
It's like a rotating torus. No, that your graphics are great.
Oh my God.
So did you put a web link in there for us?
This is GeoGebra. It's a free. Yeah, I sent you the link. So you can look through these. And then actually, as you, I think I sent you the GeoGebra. You can actually play with the file and move it yourself. It's pretty powerful.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But these screenshots speak for themselves too.
It's gorgeous.
Look at that one.
Yeah,
that's the
tetra.
vector.
That's a tetra rotating, becoming a jitterbug.
Well, that's the cube. So that's the cube octahedron. So it opens up. That's its maximum. Then you do it at the golden ratio. You got the icosahedron. Can also forms like the hull of a dodeca. You keep going. It's the octahedron, and then you can keep pressing it, which you can't really do if it's you have a hard copy of it. But this you can.
That's what they call.
I don't know. I hope you guys. There's so much more to this mathematically. I just don't know. But look at that.
That's gorgeous. Really lovely. And you know what they call this,
right.
the seed of life and the mechanism of superconductivity. Really great work. So let's be sure your link is shared with this film. That's
gorgeous. Make sure you guys have this.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna keep scroll. Look at that. That's icosahedron. This is geogebra.org. You can do this. And I'll just look at that one.
Spell that website again.
Well, geogebra.org. GeoGebra.org. That's the 3D calculator, and I think I linked my file.
Okay.
So you can reach out to me afterwards.
Like algebra with a geo. Got it. That's wonderful.
GeoGebra. Yeah, look at this one. That one.
Oh, that's super beautiful. Thank you so much. But I think we need to
thank you.
Go back to our questions.
Go ahead. Yeah, we'll circle back.
No,
we can. I don't know. Let me.
Riel has a few, and then we'll probably wrap it up if that's all right.
Guys.
That was gorgeous.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Gorgeous.
I'll send you the links to make sure you got them.
You're wonderful. Go ahead, Riel.
Thanks. So I did post the questions in the chat just because I didn't know if we would have time because they're kind of all over the place, but also relevant to a lot of the slides that Mr. Winter has shared with us. The first one is actually about the moon and the origins of the moon having related to the word menses, which I'm connecting to like menstrual cycles and wondering if the moon has any directly links on the cycles that women go through. And as we say, the moon's an artificial metal shell. How is that affecting us?
Well, actually, I think that's a very useful question. I think it may be that Maurice Cottrell did some of the best work on that in Tutankhamun Prophecies, basically showing that access to the solar wind determines fertility, ovulation in general, and that if you didn't get access to the solar wind in the right geometry, you absolutely will not get ovulation. And what the moon is doing is simple. When the moon gets in the way, you get none of the solar longitudinal. Very simple. So yes, it has everything to do with menses. I mean, when we did our BLISS process in the Gurdjieff sacred gymnastic, the women started, not only did they ovulate together, but the rate of ovulation doubled. So obviously, BLISS mechanic is the climax form of ovulation trigger. Anyway, your second question.
The second question is about from your slide number 81 about the whirling dervishes. What is the connection between UFOs and the whirling dervishes from the Sufi mystics? Because I think there's even a point on that slide that said that they look exactly like a UFO. So it's like, why are the UFO saucers the shape that they are?
Well, I mean, the simplest answer is to understand how a Mercury vortex makes gravity. By the way, it's a red iron powder doped Mercury, so it has fluid inertia and magnetic inertia. But when that inertial path down the vortex becomes implosive, just like Schauberger, it spits out a longitudinal wave at the center, making it an electric generator and a gravity maker. So to understand how a Mercury vortex makes gravity, it's the same question the Sufi dervish is asking himself when he says, can I do this spin in front of my master without getting dizzy? It will prove I have pure intention because I have made gravity with my attention.
That's really interesting. So then does that, that almost is like just another way of explaining that they have these inertia dampeners with it that create a field around the UFO that
the idea is if the centripetal inertia of the implosive plasma is implosive enough, then you carry your own inertial frame with you, so you can make a right turn at 1,000 miles an hour for sure. But the beginning of that is to understand how that vortex made gravity by imploding the transverse into the longitudinal at center, named a gravity wave. And that implosion, spitting out that longitudinal at the Planck threshold implosive center, is actually a gravity maker. And that is directly related to how your attention must work in the dervish spin if you were to make your own gravity and not get dizzy, proving your attention is a shareable wave, literally electrically pure attention. Number 3, question.
Okay, thanks. And so, yeah, if anybody else has any questions, please. I don't want to hog the rest of the time that we have. So anybody raise their hand or post in the chat here.
Number 3.
Thanks. So about the magnetic weakness of the Earth and how it affects compassion. So we're losing magnetism. Is that connected to the magnetic poles flipping? Is that like, are we about to experience something like that? Or recently just did?
The magnetic poles regularly flip, and it's like a breathing operation. But it's very true that the density of the Schumann harmonics are directly related to the evolution of compassion. Hey, look, kids raised in the country, barefoot in the mud, have more compassion than kids raised in the city because they're centripetal. They have access to ground. Read the book Earthing. So access to the Schumann harmonics is access to magnetic implosion, which is access to compassion, which is literally access to empathy because it allows you to feel inside out, I am the you inside of me. And so, yes, magnetic harmonics related to a perfected Schumann cascade, which would be golden ratio times Planck, would be access to implosive compression and grounding and the book Earthing. So major magnetic weaknesses in Earth will affect the evolution of compassion actively. The major issue right now is simple. People living in big cities are disconnected from Schumann harmonics, and therefore the very possibility of empathy, compassion, and bliss by definition.
Amazing. Okay. And ignore the 4th question because I'm going to go back, try to come full circle with Russia and Ukraine and Putin. Have you been keeping up with Michael Sala's work in the Farsight Institute and their remote viewing into the mind of Putin and how that's been affecting everything?
Okay, well, now I get to put my 2 cents in. So,
please.
Okay. You know, I love Courtney Brown, Farsight, very, very dedicated people, and his remote viewers are probably the most talented on the planet, and they are military quality, no question. However, I believe that actually Elena Danan was right after we examined Courtney Brown's latest presentation of Michael Sala, saying that there's these nasty grays messing with Putin's head. Elena, I think, says correctly, the advanced, even the medium extraterrestrials, certainly the Federation, Andromeda, and Arcturians, have for a very long time had shields to inhibit lucid remote viewers. It's well known. And so all of the advanced cultures know when, I mean, there are even alarms for remote viewers at Area 51. It's well known. We now know that's a longitudinal node. So Courtney Brown was, you know, the key point of Courtney Brown's presentation is when the lady, I think her name's Princess, she says, oh, well, this gray who was messing with Putin's mind says, maybe I'm just messing with your mind. When she asked the gray messing with Putin's mind, what are you doing there? He says, well, really, I'm just messing with your head, not his. I mean, there was a clue there. So unfortunately, I think Elena may be correct that there was some.
I fired up the GeoGebra here to show you just while you're talking. I mean, it's can you see this?
Yeah, well, it's great. Okay. Oh, that is gorgeous, but we need to finish our conversation here, but thank you.
Okay, there it is though. Anyway.
It's so good. I think we need to do a whole event with you because it's so great. But Riel, have we finished your question there? So Elena Danan, whom I've been making videos with for some time on the physics of
I'm updated. I've watched all of those documentaries with Elena. They're amazing.
And she is very clear. She thinks Courtney Brown, sadly, is a bit confused and doesn't understand the higher dynamics of remote viewing, which depend upon plasma shielding of plasma intelligence. Obviously, if you have your own cocoon. So, you know, it's true the grays have messed with many humans and you know, they mess with your thoughts, no question. And the Nebu, they're the bad guys for sure. But Courtney Brown doesn't have the whole picture according to Elena. Anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially because at the beginning there, he's explaining how resistant all of the remote viewers were. Like they believe that the ET aspect of all of this is discrediting to their work of remote viewing and are so reluctant to incorporate that all. And now they say, well, every time we remote view, we see non-human intelligence, the grays, whatever beings there are. So yeah, I see what you, okay, that's really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, that's, my questions are answered.
Okay, thank you. Is there any, and you know, what we're saying here is that, you know, these leaders like Putin, although they're probably profoundly confused, and the horror of that war shocks me as much as anyone. All I'm saying is we might have tools to do the psychological collapse process to end religion wars, including this one, because fundamentally, if Putin's excuse to his people is that the West is soulless, if we know what the physics of soul is, then we can do the psychological collapse of this religion war.
Got you. Well, I think it's probably about time to wrap it up. We're approaching the 2-hour mark, if that's all right. But I truly wanted to not only thank yourself, Dan, thank Jason, Peter, Patrick, everybody here as well for coming on. This has been absolutely fantastic. And I agree with you, Dan, as well, that I think it may be appropriate to start to start a roundtable of sorts with Peter and Jason and Patrick as well. So we'll talk on email. We'll see what we can do there. But as well, if you'd like to jump in.
To be continued. Thank you. And Jason has done a huge amount of research on the future vision capabilities of the various political parties, evidencing that they actually were using phase conjugate mirrors to see the future and predict the future. And there's a whole complicated politics based on that, including the messy Q story. So to be continued next time.
Thank you so much, everyone. And we'll catch you all next time. Cheers.
Blessings. Thank you.
Thanks.
Follow your